And just to sum that up, I think there's a perfect relationship between what the plays are about, bouncers and teachers, and the content. Sorry, the form of it and the content completely, and what you've just described there. So presumably anybody studying the work should sort of closely look at that relationship. And of course, other works that you've done in previous years have actually done a similar thing. And whatever the content of the play has then made you decide how to actually put that across to an audience.
I think it's a very good observation. I think the thing about bouncers is form and content are absolutely perfectly matched together. That the content is visceral and breaks icons and plays with theatre, and the form of it is, we are four bouncers, but we're actors. We're pretending to be bouncers. We're going to show you this play in which we'll try to play all these parts. It kind of forgives itself even before it starts, and you've got to come on this journey. And we're going to stop the play, and here's a speech. That's directly out of Marat, and the influence of German writing, which I'd actually done the Marat at school. I'm remembering back when I was 16, and that had a big influence on my work. And the opening speech, I can still kind of recite. That is there in Bouncers, and also the thing that actually the play comes for you. You can't hide away from it. You can't pretend it's not there. It's coming directly for you. And people have said it's stand-up theatre, and people have said it's part pantomime. I don't think it is. I think its influences are much more European. Its influences are much more coming out of the Peter Weiss and the Marat and the even Brecht, and the elliptic nature of the writing in Buchner's Wojciech, where the scenes are short and sharp, and everything that's said, there's no fat on it. It's absolutely crisp, and it demands the audience's shared experience. And I think you're right to say that that the form of those plays, as in Teachers, I'd written a very quite unsuccessful play called EPA when I was in education, and I think it was full of kind of desperate bile and personal rancour and just feelings of desperation of getting out of teaching. And then later, about 5 or 6 years later, when I'd been out of teaching for some time, I was able to write Teachers, I think, a freer kind of hand, and actually just returning to what I'd had as a drama teacher, a chair and a space, and the audience's imagination and the actor's imagination. That's what, and also the political questioning. I think that's there in the plays. I think quite often, because the plays are funny, the politics of the plays have quite often been lost. April in Paris, and when we sat in this theatre with the set of April in Paris in front of us, is a very political play, written 18 years ago. It could have been written last week, about redundancy and about the greyness of this island, about an island mentality. Use of language is very, very spare. It's very, very brutal. And the fascinating feeding frenzy that happens when you get into Europe, and in a particular place like Paris, where you think, my God, where have I been all my life? And that was something for me. I mean, we only ever went to Blackpool for the first 21 years of my life. Didn't go anywhere else. Suddenly, my parents died, and we didn't want to go to Blackpool because there were too many memories. September in the Rain is about that, and then we went to Whitley Bay and up the northeast coast, all these things, they grist to the mill, if you like.
Now, in Bouncers and Teachers, there are what a lot of people who look at your work call stereotypes. What does the word stereotypes mean to you? And do you use stereotypes? Is it more complex than that?
I think it's interesting, the stereotype thing. I think it's very easy to take it as a pejorative term. I think in Bouncers there are stereotypes. I think Plain Elaine is a stereotype. I think somebody famously said, I think it was a young one who said, living is a cliche, it's all been done before. And I think there is that in those plays. I would argue, but perhaps this is not the right place for it, that there are many stereotypes in theatre, and theatre actually works off stereotypes. If you look at the plays of Brian Friel, for example, there are so many drunken Irish vicars and long love-lost elder sisters and daughters from Irish Catholic backgrounds that they've become a kind of stereotype. You look at Shirley Valentine, she's become a kind of middle-aged woman whose husband doesn't love her, so she legs it to grief. She's become a kind of stereotype. I think the characters in Bouncers, I'm just parking that for one sec. I think you look at the 2.4 children demonstrated in Outnumbered. They've become a kind of, Oxford Landing drinking stereotype. Because they are true, and that their counterpart lives outside there somewhere in, South Norwood or Primrose Hill or whatever, they are a stereotype. They reflect something that happens in society out there, and they've been based on that, and that's what they're illustrating.
And as a director, how would you use stereotypes in rehearsal? Do you talk to the actors about maybe thinking about the stereotype of the particular character, but maybe trying to keep part of that delivery real and recognisable as somebody that lives next door? I mean, how do you put that across to the actors? How do you formalise that in terms of directing?
I think what's interesting, what I was going on to say was that in Bouncers, because there's multi-role playing, very, very difficult for an 18-stone man to justifiably really be a 12-stone, attractive-looking young woman of 18 out on the pole. So you have to use signifiers that we recognise, and of course you use the handbags and you use hiya. Now why? I think, why do people laugh at that? Well, they laugh at it because they recognise it, and if they recognise it, is it a stereotype because they recognise it, or is it just the true action of young women who are going out for their hair done and they're out on the town? Similarly with the lads, I had to use a language that was instantly recognisable. And you could say, that Lucky Eric is a stereotype in that he's a big bruising bouncer who's got a brain and thinks about other things. Well, bouncers aren't mostly renowned for thinking about other things, but maybe there are one or two who actually have a philosophical mindset and want to think about what they're doing and the goods and bads and a morality. So while stereotyping as a label sometimes gnarls you, and you think, well, actually, we all become, I think, kind of bits of what we are and what's around us. I mean, in a way, I've become a kind of, there's a lovely Monty Python's thing, Four Yorkshiremen sketch. Who would have thought we'd be sat here drinking Chateau de Chasselet? Well, there are times when I think, gosh, I've become a cliche of the working class lad who's become a playwright. So they're very. I think the jury's still out on what that actually means.
When we study your work, we often think about Brecht as an influence, as it is on much of modern theatre. In fact, you were born the same year that Brecht died. And I'm not saying you're a reincarnation, but it is obviously important to you. If you were starting to study your work, what do you think is important to look at? What
I take from Bertolt Brecht is the penetration into non-theatre going audiences. Also the centrality of poetry and what I would call poetry of the everyday. Also the nature that, a lot of the scene structure in Brecht is very, very elliptical, quite short, to the point, and quite often, the scenes, the placarding of Brecht's work, the scenes tell you what they're going to be about before you actually see the scenes. And in a similar way that happens in Bouncers. I think if you look at plays like Teachers, I think the storytelling aspects and again you could look at Brecht, but you could also look at Shakespeare, and you could say, the opening of the prologues in Shakespeare are very, very similar to the Starter Teachers. They come on and they say, this is a play about so-and-so, in exactly the same way that in Bouncers they say, this is a play called Bouncers. In exactly the same way that in Henry V, he says essentially, when I come on again, we're in France. And up and under, Well, the up and under opening is taken directly is lifted from Shakespeare. So that, the whole idea of would know and the whole idea of journey and the whole idea, I suppose central to this, Andrew, is it more theatrical or is it more realistic to believe a realistic set on stage, or is it more realistic to know the conceit with the audience and the actors that this is all prefabricated, it's all make-believe, it's all a game, and it's all a shared 2-hour journey that we're going to pretend that we know what's going on here? Which is the most realistic? And if you look at Brecht for a second, you say, in Arturo Ui, he never makes any reference to Hitler. But all the audience at the time knew he was referencing Hitler. Now, the question is it more realistic for us to think we know who that is and he exists outside this theatre, or for us to see him, a real portrayal of the man Hitler, and say, oh, that's Hitler there? And Brecht's view was, as I understand it, that it was more politically realistic to say, listen, this isn't Hitler I'm showing you. This is not a cathartic view of Hitler. This is what's happening out there. And I think that's really, really true of my work. And I think about it from Bouncers through to April in Paris. It's not like that, we're showing you the world and that's all there is. In Bouncers and April in Paris, these two guys on this stage tonight are showing you the reality of a socio-political situation with people being made redundant. And the only way they can get to Paris is winning it in a magazine. And it's not a kind of cathartic, that's it, it's done, wasn't it great? Actually, those people are out there. And similarly in Bouncers, it says, listen, actually, the reality of Bouncers is worse than the play.
John Godber, thank you for your time today and this wonderful place, Wakefield Theatre Royal and Opera House. And if you haven't been to this place, then one of Frank Matcham's finest. Wikipedia, Frank Matcham, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Thank you, John Godber. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.